Cool. Hi everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for having me today. As Marcel mentioned, I'm Leonardo, Lenny for short. I'm a software engineer at Twitter. I'm currently part of the Twitter.com team, but I was pretty part of the TweetDeck team. In case you don't know what TweetDeck is, it's an alternate client that is owned by Twitter that looks like Twitter.com, but kind of shows multiple timelines at the same time. You can see like different types of timelines, your notifications, your like home timeline or any search. And it kind of live updates in real time, kind of like popping data on top, with some other functionalities like scheduling tweets in the future, or like doing some fine-grained filtering for each of those timelines. It's basically a client aimed for power users that use Twitter. A bit over a year ago, we started using React as part of like building TweetDeck. The reason was basically that we wanted to have like more explicit dependencies between like, our components and relationships between them, and we wanted to stop having this like weird case of like having seemingly unrelated bugs in one part of the app when we were working on like another part. We were having like a lot of like implicitness around. So basically, I wanted to share like some quick tips that we learned for adopting React in a very legacy code base. We're still like a long way to go to get like a fully powered React app, but it's been like a year now since we started like, adopting it, and we've learned some things along the way. So these are basically the 4 things that I want to share today. So the first one, adapt your code base. So at TweetDeck, we mainly use a library called Flight.js to render UI. It was an in-house library built to create dynamic UIs at the time of Backbone, so it's very old. It's very limited, and it basically doesn't allow any kind of interaction between components other than via events, like jQuery events, actually. And doesn't prescribe like any way to actually update the UI in the DOM. So it leaves that up to you, similar to Backbone, for anyone that's familiar with that. So over time, we start like creating our own wrapper or like our own flavor of it, adding some features by looking at some other libraries that as they were coming, particularly React. Things like props and state, mounting and tearing down components, even adding some lifecycle methods. So we were basically kind of closing the gap between Flight and React, which happened to benefit us when we started to do the migration. Basically, what this allowed by doing this is creating like 2 really small wrappers like that allowed us to map a component from the written in Flight to be exposed as a React component, and the other way around. So we didn't really care anymore about the implementation of a component. We could use it like wherever we wanted. So this allowed us to mix and match components throughout the app. And we actually have very weird like long hierarchies of components where like some of them are Flight, some of them are React, and it works seamlessly. One example is our all filtering section on the timelines. So second one, whether to use top-down or bottom-up for the migration, and the answer is both. In most cases, when we start like adopting React, we kind of start from the bottom of the like we start from our components at the leaf nodes, which have no dependencies with other components. So we start migrating like one at a time, and once all the components, like subcomponents of a component are rendered, now we're moved to the upper level. So this is good. This works for us, but we also found out that because of the first point, we can actually do this at any level. Like we can also start from the intermediate components at the tree, and we can just wrap the child components as a React component, and we can keep going from there to the top. And we found that really useful because when we have like we can get like a quickly overall structure of the app with React sooner rather than like waiting for all the leaf components to do that. And it also allowed us to maybe think of like considering code splitting different parts of the application, like by using some of the React's built-in features. Third, we wanted to solve the implicitness in our app, so we didn't want to like keep providing that thing like implicitness also to the new React components. So the way that React solves implicitness is obviously with by passing data down as props, and callbacks up, like also via props. But in our case, as I mentioned, our component library that we were using is based on events, which are like a very loosely coupled way of communicating between components. So whenever there was actually a real couple between components, that would have been unnoticed. Like I mean, we were making that coupling implicit. So and it was also very easy to misuse. So it was very easy to hook into that implicit event and use it in some unrelated part of the code. So what we did when migrating components to React, so this is one example of how the old way worked. Notice that the bottom component is emitting an event, and the top one is listening to it. Like there's the communication there is implicit. So when we migrated the top one to React, we actually wanted to have like an explicit prop passing for that callback, so that the relationship between the event and the listener is explicit. So what we did is actually change the old implementation to receive that as props. Remember that we added prop support for our library. So we started like adopting callback props in the edges of the interactions between React and Flight. And final one, which I think is key to every refactor, and it was also like pointed out before by Daniel. I think Blackbox testing was really good for us. So we aimed to make our tests just render a thing and just focus on the output or on the behavior of like the rendered thing. So this allowed us to just keep the same tests as we had before and just changing like the implementation detail of how we render a component, whether it is using Flight or whether it is using React, but the same HTML structure should stay the same. So yeah, that was it for me. So thank you very much for having me.